Welcome to Sun, Sand, and Sold. Josh Tomey with you and with my co-host David Haber. As always, we are happy to be back. David, you are sporting a very sporty fishing shirt. I understand you just got back from Panama on an extended fishing excursion.
It was amazing. I was at Tropic Star Lodge, the #1 lodge for fishing in the Americas.
Well, there's a social media tag right there.
Yeah, Tropic Star Lodge, great place. We got in 3 days of fishing, we got 5 blue marlin. My wife Lisa got her first. I caught a 400-pound marlin, blue marlin, release. Everything was release.
And we were going to bring samples into the studio today, but inside of a closed podcast studio,
those are big marlin.
The fresh fish just don't smell great.
And then my friend Steve caught a 500-pound black marlin. The only place you can catch black marlin in the Americas is in Panama. The only other places are in the Azores and in Australia. So that was really fun, and Lisa caught a 50-pound mahi, which was tasted delicious. That we ate.
That's great. Well, welcome back, and thank you for theming our show as always with that. However, if those of you watching on YouTube or our Apple and Spotify podcast, if you look closely, this is actually, I think, a shark attacking. Is that a shark attacking somebody? It's not even a fishing shirt.
It's a shark attacking a swimmer.
I gotta know, just for the sake of tagging as well, where did you get that shirt?
I got it actually down in at that market in on the west side of New York near the High Line, where you end the High Line. I don't know if it's the Soho market.
Like Hudson Yards up on that side, or
down
or further down, like Meatpacking District, like up by.
It was right at the bottom of the High Line, and they have restaurants and stuff. This guy hand makes the shirts. The reason I actually wore the shirt today was I woke up and I thought Jamaican bobsled, and this cuff reminds me of Jamaican bobsled.
Well, we're going to leave that as the non sequitur of the day, having no idea why you woke up thinking about Jamaican bobsled, but this is what too much travel does to you kids.
Because it's wintertime, and there's nothing like Winter Olympics and Jamaican bobsled team.
And on that non sequitur note, would like to welcome our guest, Luis Teran, CEO of Tenant Evaluation, who is joining us for the first time on the show, and we're going to be talking about prop tech. And Luis, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you guys for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you guys.
Wonderful to delve into that. It's certainly an area that is being talked about and dealt with so much more prolifically in the real estate industry and beyond. And I think one of the things that that I have found in the management and operations side for years is that property technology, real estate technology has tended to be behind the rest of the technology world when we compare it to banking, when we compare it to insurance, when we compare it to other sort of big industries, the multi-billion-dollar core industries, core economic industries in this country. And I'm interested, Luis, from your perspective, you've been in software for how long?
Only 30 years.
Only 30 years. So 3 decades worth of that. Do you have any sense of why real estate has been behind in terms of being more cutting edge, in terms of being more accessible than other industries? Is there a rationale behind it?
My thought is it's not a sexy business. It's one of those business that when you look at it, people think it's no money there.
Right.
And that's the reason why big guys has not come into this industry.
Right. Yeah.
And I believe that's the main reason.
Yeah. And that's,
wait a minute, we're in prop and we're in property. We're sexy.
I was going to say if you wear a shirt like that,
and Luis got this beautiful jacket on. He's sexy.
I mean, listen, we're all sitting here, but it is interesting. And I think you're probably right, because I think it is more difficult to assess where revenue in real estate technology can come from, partly because you're always dealing in these smaller pockets, right? Dealing directly with assets, with a building, with a condo association, with a management company, and there's less institutional aggregation. You don't have some of the same big box orientation, and maybe a little bit more on commercial property like multifamily and Class A. Now, tenant evaluation.
That's very fancy technology words you're using. If Kyle were here, he would say, what do you mean by Class A and what do you mean by big box?
So I apologize to our watchers and watchers and listeners. So in commercial, in real estate, we generally sort of separate the worlds into residential versus traditional residential and commercial. But even within commercial, you look at multifamily or apartment rental versus condo association. And Luis, tenant evaluation, which you're going to describe a little bit to us, you do have a lot of specialty on the condo side. I know, especially here in Florida where condo is so heavy. Can you tell us a little about what tenant evaluation actually does and how you wound up operating so significantly in the condo space?
Oh, thank you. This has started almost 20 years ago. When we got into the industry, everything was done in paper. And I was part of a board of directors in a condominium in Aventura. And we had to go through the paper applications and seeing social securities and date of births.
So the application to actually live in the condo.
Yes. And those were stored in the property manager's office. So anybody can just go there, open up. Oh, is this the president? He's making a lot of money. Let me get the social security. And identity theft was a big deal back then.
Still is.
It still is. But I had to say, once we created an online system, which was one of the first ones, today looks very common, but when we started, it was very unique. When we changed the entire application process, we stopped the identity theft completely.
That's amazing. And so was this concept born out of just your experience on the condo side? Were you coming from another area in technology where you felt like that could apply in residential in a more meaningful way?
Yeah, I come from medical industry, where we had to maintain the records.
We should call you
private.
doctor.
Yes, very private. And when I look into that, and what the condominium was doing, I was like, my goodness, we had to change this.
Right.
And that's how everything started.
It's interesting that you're drawing the parallel with the medical industry. And by the way, if there are any doctors listening or watching, some ADHD medication for my co-host would be wonderful right now.
Which one?
The application, is really similar because you have almost as much exposure. And putting HIPAA law aside, obviously the Medical Privacy Act.
That's true.
The exposure level. I mean, you're still dealing with names, dates of birth,
social security numbers. That's the be all and end all. You get someone's social security number, you can do anything.
It is amazing that there historically and even currently, to my knowledge, not more high level regulation around that privacy because the exposure level, with the exception of diagnosis, is almost as high.
100%. I believe that each company that operates in this industry should be PCI compliance, period. There's no reason for anybody to store social securities in date of birth.
And PCI compliance really is tied to the kind of data that you store and the security parameters around that data?
We don't store. As soon as you apply in tenant evaluation and we run your credit, your background, evictions, and so on and so forth, your information gets deleted. I'm not in the industry of storing data. I don't want to have that liability. For one simple reason, the IRS has been hacked. Banks has been hacked. Google has been hacked.
Target.
Everybody has been hacked.
Every company.
I get an email about once a month saying my data has been exposed by somebody.
It's no.
I got a phone call from somebody saying that they were calling from the bank with this information and they gave me some social security number to try to see if it was my social security number. The amount of fraud out there with people who have access to information is incredible.
It is incredible. It's really disturbing.
The question is not if there is. The question is when. And when that happens, hopefully never. But if it happens, there's nothing in our servers.
Right.
There's no social security, so data.
So if they hack your server, there's nothing they're going to find.
Nothing there.
And moreover, what tenant evaluation brought to the marketplace, and as I understand it, and certainly from my own experience, I mean, I met you nearly that 20 years ago when tenant evaluation was a relatively young company. was, and I remember, a particular company, and I won't name it, that my firm used at the time to do these applications for residency, which is the background, criminal and credit, depending on the nature of the tenancy. We had just, giant files full of paper. And did we have a destruction protocol around that? No, we did not. I mean, I can tell you that. And the level of exposure would have been extremely high, but it just wasn't something that we thought about a lot. So you brought that to the market with tenant evaluation. Was there instantaneous reception to it? Did people understand immediately the value of taking that approach?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to try to respond in the best way. When we brought tenant evaluation with everything we do, that means our system replaced one person in the management office because we dedicate one person just to take a look at the paperwork, fax information somewhere. So that's the entire job. When we approached those companies, people were in shock because they're going to be losing one resource, which is a good thing for property management companies, but it's a bad thing for the employee. So those who are the over issues we have to overcome.
Right.
Because this person was the firewall for us to get in. When somebody comes to you and say, I'm going to replace you, what do you do? Oh, no, we don't need tenant evaluation here.
Right. I find where they park their car is what I do.
Slash the tires.
We tried that twice.
Did you get your tires slashed a couple of times?
I'm old school. I mean, listen, you want to make a point, you make a point.
Well, you are from Boston after all.
You make a point.
So yeah, the first part of the years were a little bit tough trying to explain that they're not going to be replaced. They're going to be put into a better position to probably show the building, to greet the new tenants. And they can use the time for a better purpose than actually looking into paperwork.
Shuffling paper.
Exactly.
Are you aware? I mean, so now flash forward 20 years. Are you aware? Is anybody still using the old methodology? I mean, is anybody still doing any of this? Are they really? I mean, It's hard to imagine using paper in 2024, almost 2025.
It goes back to age. There's property managers there in a particular age, and they don't want changes. And there are board directors in a particular age group. They don't want any changes. They are now open to technology.
And so there's still some. And would you say those are mostly in smaller, less urban areas where the management companies aren't as big and may dictate the process, or is it just really depending on the particular association or building, they make their own call?
It's about all associations.
Right. Let me ask you a question,
yes,
Luis. Does tenant evaluation do more background checks for multifamily apartment buildings or more for condominium units where there's a tenant and the board has to approve of the tenant? Or is it 50-50?
It's a great question.
I tend to ask the great questions on this show.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
Pretty much
Patience, Josh.
Pretty much we deal with property management companies. Our biggest clients are property management companies who manage condominiums.
It's more condo than multifamily.
HOAs, yeah.
Now that I have to also imagine is a function of you being Florida-based. You're a Miami-based operation. Yeah. Obviously, in Florida, we've seen, and we've talked about this before, David. We've seen a lot of the quote-unquote multifamily, i.e., rental, actually born out of the condo world. I know when I first started using tenant evaluation on a management company basis, most of the applicants I was screening, though it was within the context of condominium associations, were actually renters going into the condominium association. Right. And so I know you do a lot of that, but you're also screening potential owners.
Correct. For putting things in perspective, it's extremely important to screen either buyers or renters. For one simple reason, the condominium has the right to protect themselves.
Well, not all have the right to screen, but most do.
Right. I was going to ask you some questions about that as a follow-up.
It's all about what's in the declaration.
Let me finish so we can go into the legality. But we forgot one thing. If we have 10 to 20% of the people do not pay the maintenance fee, that affects the price of the units.
That's true.
And everybody else has to subsidize the people they don't pay. So screening, I don't see that as a only background.
It's interesting to that perspective, right?
More
it's
about
financial and whether the economic
impact. Yeah.
Are you financially solid to be able to maintain the building the way it's supposed to be.
So using the math in my head, I'm thinking back to the real estate crash of 2008, 2009. That had to be an opportunity for tenant evaluation because there was such high delinquency rate during that period of time.
Yeah, there was 15 to 25%.
A lot of owners collecting. So just for the sake of our viewers and our listeners, Luis, so generally speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, and David, you can weigh in here. Generally speaking, my historical understanding is that when there is a fiduciary relationship or a financial relationship set up between a prospective owner and a condo association, meaning the owner is paying maintenance fees to the condo association directly. The condo association, while they may or may not have the absolute right per declaration, which we can get into, or the governing documents of that association, they are interested in the financial capacity of that prospective owner, the applying owner who's now applying through tenant evaluation platform. Can they pay? Do they have a good credit history? Are they on stable financial footing so that we know they can afford that?
Did they just file bankruptcy 3 years ago?
Right, $3,000 a month, whatever it happens to be on that condo maintenance fee. But in the case of a renter, so a renter might come in and actually rent that unit from that owner.
Right.
They're not paying the condo association directly. And though I know there are some laws, David, that allow a condo association to potentially collect rent if a unit owner is in arrears, that ordinarily what's happening is the renter is paying the unit owner and the unit owner is paying the condo association.
Typically, yes, unless there's a default, in which case you have the right to collect directly from the tenant. I think the issue with tenants in condominiums is more, are you going to create havoc in the condominium? Have you been thrown out? I had a situation where a condominium denied an applicant as a tenant. Person had a lot of money, but they were throwing parties with 50 and 100 people every Friday night and bringing people home from the club on South Beach back in the day. And they had been already thrown out of one condominium for violating the rules. And the question on the questionnaire was, have you ever been rejected? Have you ever been thrown out? Evicted, this, that, and the other. And the answer had been yes. And they said, whoa, we don't want you because you've already created a problem in another condominium and we're not letting you in here. Then, of course, you had issues with, and unfortunately, there are people who, whether they've been convicted of a crime, whether they are...
Is this like matters of moral turpitude?
Yeah, matters of moral turpitude or being around children. People who have been convicted of sex crimes. Can you be in a condominium with children running around when you've been convicted of a sex crime?
So let's ask our expert here. So when someone's applying for residency or occupancy, whether it's an owner or a tenant, you're running a criminal background check.
Right.
Where does that information come from? I mean, where's the sources of these information? I mean, I have to imagine it's governmental, but how does tenant evaluation get access to that?
Public record.
Yeah, but this is what the interesting part is. There's no centralized database in the U.S. Every county, every state has unique databases. So what we need to go to every single source of
that's
each
crazy to have to do all
bring
that.
All that information. So that's what makes backgrounds a little more difficult to pull. But yeah, we have the technology to do so.
Because you can also pull the technology to see if someone filed bankruptcy anywhere in the United States. Correct?
So that's on the financial side.
Yeah.
But on the criminal side, so your tenant evaluation has a process. Is it unique? Does tenant evaluation use a proprietary process, or is it something that other companies use?
100%.
And that's been developed over time?
Yes.
So then you're going through this process. Number one, how long does it take? I mean, how long does it take to get that feedback?
You mean to pull the credit?
Right, to pull the background.
Is it you press one button with the person's information?
It's instant.
Okay, so
you can you literally have software program algorithms, whatever the technological terms are. You put in the person's name, you put in their address, you put in their whatever, whether it's social security number or not, and it'll draw from all of these public record sources, and it'll print out a report.
Yes, but on top of that, we are finishing an implementation for face recognition. So yeah, maybe a record comes under your name, but that doesn't mean it's you, right? Then we had to verify that with face recognition.
Or there are 10 people with the name
David Haber
or Luis Teran.
Right.
Right.
So part of
There's
what
only
we're
one
do,
David Haber, let's be honest.
Thanks God.
And yes, I was going to say, and the world is eternally grateful for you, is what I mean.
All right. Somehow, listeners, I think they were making a joke at my expense, but I didn't take it that way.
At least this joke we don't have to edit in post, because when you make jokes, it takes time and money for our editors to have to clean that up.
But you know what? I'm the one who keeps people awake around here.
Abraham, can we eventually get a mute button? Like, if we know he's going down that road, is it like, can we do the old school, like 1980s bleeping, the bleep? I mean, remember those days when you used to actually get the bleep on TV?
Yeah.
Before the advanced
Control Alt Delete.
That was like the Howard Stern show back in the day.
It was back in the day. So, all right. So they're going through this process. They fill this information, and there's basically an instantaneous response. So a couple of curiosity questions here that I'm sure our listeners and viewers want to know. Number one, when you run that background, obviously they're telling you who they are and where they're from. Are you running it only based on what they tell you, or are you covering the whole country and saying, we don't know where you've been, so therefore we're gonna check anywhere potentially?
No, we check the entire country.
Okay. Let me just put a disclaimer here that I represent Luis and Tenant Evaluation. So I just need to put that out there. Haber Law represents them. So I know a little bit more than the average listener about Tenant Evaluation. I have an interesting question right here. What about people who come from Europe? What about people who come from South America?
Which are a lot here in a place like Miami.
So I just thought of it for the first time. Do you have the ability to draw information internationally?
Yes, we do.
Wow. So that's even more difficult, because now you're talking about, like, if you're pulling...
So you don't know that much about tenant evaluation. I think you may need to look at new representation, because I mean that seems like a big miss.
Good in court. Okay.
So if we have any attorneys listening or watching right now, we got a potential client here.
Hey, stop!
It's got a great product.
How you think he pays for the Panama trip?
Yeah. So I guess my question is, you're pulling credit from Colombia. You're pulling credit from Brazil.
No credit. Background.
Oh, background. So you're pulling background from all these countries. Some are Spanish, some are Portuguese, maybe Russian, maybe German. How does someone in Miami read a report that's not even in English?
Okay, so
I'm just asking.
Let's go back. That option is available. That doesn't mean everybody's going to do it.
So that's like an add-on.
Yeah, imagine somebody comes from Russia, and the condominium ABCD wants to do a background for this particular person. When we send the information to Russia, it's going to take probably 30 days to 45 days.
Wow.
Right? And the cost is going to be between 500 to 800.
Wow.
Each country is a different.
And that's if Russia even responds.
And I assume that's not as automated, because it's not like you have.
It's not. So
I have the feeling information in Russia is a little more sparse and protected than it might be here. That's just a guess on my part.
And you cannot do that for France. France do not share criminal records of the Europeans. Protects the identity of the
What other countries in Europe are that way? Just
most European countries.
Really?
Yeah. You cannot.
I bet Germany is that way.
You cannot just simply go and pull a criminal record in somebody.
Now, how's South America in that regard?
South America, you can.
What about Interpol? I mean, I got to assume Interpol.
Very good question.
So that's the International Police Organization. They've got more of an assembled database. Potentially has that information.
So what we do is we pull the Interpol instead of going to Russia or going to Mexico.
See, all you listeners
Interpol.
Didn't know we were dealing with spy stuff, but we are.
Right. But yeah, we run international databases. Interpol being one of those.
That's great.
Terrorist database. Also, we run that. So there are some databases that we run as a default.
Now let me ask you another question. The United States has these OFAC laws now, and then you have the Venezuelans who are laundering money for the government.
For our listeners, you want to define OFAC for everyone?
I would rather you do it.
So essentially, it's a financial crimes and disclosure data set.
So it's really interesting, because with Venezuela and other countries, on the list of people who are laundering money for either governments that are engaged in, I would say with Venezuela, it's communism. But
well, let's say let's call it bad actors according to
bad
the US,
actors,
whether it's Venezuela or North Korea or Iran
or Russia now.
Right.
So the question becomes, if you're a condominium, are you allowed to take maintenance payments from an owner that may be from a country, or the owner himself or the person behind the LLC may be on the list?
But
The answer-
that's not the real question. Is if that money comes from a U.S. bank, because usually it does come from a U.S. bank, the responsibility is to the U.S. bank. They accept the money in the first place.
But what if you do the background check and you find out they're on the list? You have to let the condo know, right?
Of course.
Yeah. And then the condo has to say, whoa, I can't take money from this person, whether the bank
Right.
has the money or not. The minute you know that someone's on the OFAC list or that they're involved in, whether it's laundering of Russian oligarch money, which of course got a lot of people in trouble in the last 5 years with freezing of assets, or whether or not it's Venezuela or North Korea or whatever it is, or China. Now in Florida, with the you can't own property if you're a nationalized Chinese, all of these things are critical for any owner, whether it's condominium owner or
commercial, right?
or commercial owner.
So after the first break, we're going to get into some of the legal pieces of this. But I want to get back to sort of tenant and its place in the market, because it's always been my impression this is in terms of the life cycle of an owner or resident in a condominium or multifamily. You're step number one, right? I mean, in some ways, you are the paradigm, the wall, whatever, however you want to call it, right?
You're the safeguard.
You're that first step. So you are running background check in the cases where there's a financial relationship, like a case of a condominium owner. You're looking at finances, and on the finance side, putting aside foreign players, you're looking at their credit report. Is that like a FICO score? Is that just reporting on were they in collections? Derogatory information, what actually is being looked at, and is there a universal approve deny criteria? Does tenant evaluation actually make the recommendation on approval or denial, or is that really up to the condo association or the commercial entity?
Okay, so let's start
with the management company
with the first part of the question.
Yeah, you asked long compound objection compound
objection. I just like saying objection.
Okay.
We not just only put credit reports. Additional to that, we work with the banks. So we know exactly how much money you have in the bank account.
Wow.
We know where you work, how much money you make. It's important. I mean, credit only give you a small part.
So this is really financial background. This is not a credit, right? Because I think a lot of people make the mistake of assuming
a credit
running
score.
a credit check. This is not just a credit check.
No.
This is a financial viability assessment.
You can go deep into even know
this is a deep state question.
Where the person, how much money he makes, tax returns, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
And how does a condo association make the decision based on tenant evaluations data, whether it is criminal background or general background or financial? Or do you make a recommendation based on, so that really is up to them to say, look, you've got your own criteria. And again, David, after the break, I would like to understand how that criteria gets practically set. Because I got to assume there's some
for tenant evaluation for my client, for Luis's and his company's benefit, they don't interpret data. Right. They provide the data that's in the public records and what's in the private bank records. But they do not interpret it for whether it's a multifamily, whether it's a commercial tenant, like a restaurant or a big box, whatever. They don't interpret data. They hand you the data, and then whoever the determining company, board of directors for a condo, commercial property owner, they then look at the data, and they have their own criteria for what they want to accept or reject. Tenant evaluations has nothing to do with whether a tenant is accepted or rejected.
So you're providing unfiltered data, whatever it is, whatever criteria is set, that's up to the receiving entity. It's not up to you. You're not saying approved deny.
No, we are a third-party reporting agency. We just pass the data along to the decision makers. And to go back to your question, how they make a decision, they have to go based only and exclusively about the condo docs. Condo docs says exactly why somebody can get denied. That's when all these debates start opening up, because we have seen condominiums, they decide to deny for ethnicity, for
that's illegal.
I know it is.
Yeah,
but
it's not tenant evaluations that makes any of those decisions.
We do not make any decision about that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So again, you're step number one. So now let's say you've provided this information. I assume more often than not, you're providing that information to the property management company, who is really more your direct client in terms of interaction, correct? So you're dealing with property management companies, property managers directly, their corporate offices. You're giving that information. From a high level, and since we're talking about prop tech today, are you a subscription service? Do they pay on a per application basis? Is there variabilities there?
We have created a module where it's zero cost for the condominium. The applicant pay for it. So
there's an application fee.
It's an application fee. Let's see.
And a background check fee.
No, application fee.
Oh, and it goes through that application
which is all encompassing.
So let's say in the state of Florida, you can charge only up to $150. Let's see, my cost to the association, to the applicant is $50, right? I charge the applicant $150. I deduct my $50, and the rest goes to the condominium.
Got it.
So we are a profit center for the condominium, and they don't pay for the application fee.
So basically you're acting as that fee taker. So they can transact financially with tenant evaluation directly. So somebody applies, they're actually using what I assume is a secure payment portal of some kind, that they're going online, they're applying for occupancy, they're paying their condo application fee, you're deducting the expense of the checks, and then whatever's left over, you're saying goes back to the condo association.
I would argue it's not profit to the condo association of $100, let's say, in that hypothetical, because they then have to take the time and the effort to interpret the data. The manager has to meet with the board and give recommendations, and that takes time. And of course, that's time of a property manager who's getting paid an annual salary. So my argument for the condo association would be it's just paying for the time and effort to have to go through the process. But at least you're getting paid for it rather than having to do it and take away time from other services that they need to provide.
If nothing else, it's reimbursed. You're getting some kind of reimbursement. So this is really to both of you, but Luis, it'd be great if you started. There's no cost directly to the condo association.
There's not.
Or to the receiving building. And so therefore it's a cost neutral exercise. And obviously, clearly based on the data that you're providing, it's a critical exercise. Why doesn't every single building use this? I mean, why would anybody not use this? Is there any justification for saying I'm not going to go through this process?
I don't want to know who my tenants or owners are.
Right. I mean, do people not want to know? Or David, maybe, and back to you, is it because they don't have the provisions in their declaration that support that process, and so they kind of
that's correct.
Pass it over.
If you don't have the right to reject an owner based on, if you don't have the right to approve or reject an owner, then, you may not want to go through the process. But I would argue that you want to know who your tenants and or owners are in any building.
Right.
And I would argue that in today's world, with all of the craziness that goes on, and it does go on all over the place, you want to know. And the more information you have, the better, even if it's to be aware that someone's a problem. Even if you can't prevent them from owning, you can keep a special, make sure that you're aware of what their past problems are to avoid those problems in the future.
Right. I will go, I'm sorry to interrupt, I will go even farther than that. Even if you cannot screen, you should use tenant evaluation to collect the essential documents like your passport, driver license, pet vaccinations, sign all the condo docs, right?
Tenant evaluation includes pet vaccinations.
Yeah, you can collect that as well.
Could you collect, here's just a funny question. During COVID, could you collect whether someone had COVID shots?
We can collect any document the condominium requires.
That would be a fun exercise to go through. This is my stare at the camera to everybody who just got their pulse and
the
just
anti-vaxxers. Let me tell you something. It's interesting to think that you could get information about whether someone was vaccinated. I wonder whether that's a HIPAA violation.
I was gonna say we're wandering into the medical space because we're not talking on behalf of their Cocker Spaniel. We're talking on behalf of their personal medical. So you could collect. If a condo association said
if the condo docs allow it, we can collect it. If they don't allow it,
then you can't.
Then we are not going to collect
Now, obviously, this is not a passive process. Somebody has to agree to submit, whether it's required or not. They obviously have to agree to submit their personal information. In a case
That's
where
typically in the application itself, where they write and they sign and they say, "I hereby authorize you to get my information." And that is a signed application.
Right. It's not like a surreptitious collection.
No.
You're sending somebody a link on email that says you need to apply. Here's what it is. So they're voluntarily submitting it. I mean, at that point, David, I got to assume from a legal perspective, if they're voluntarily submitting to this background examination, including financial and criminal, whether or not a condo association or a building could approve or deny, you're signing away, you're waiving essentially those rights and saying, so we are letting them look at it, whether or not it allows them to approve or deny.
Well, it's interesting because there's a bifurcated process there. If you don't have the right in the condo documents to approve or deny, the applicant could say to the condo, I'm not signing this voluntary waiver because you have no right to check on me.
How often does that happen?
It happens once in a while. I think the bigger problem, and the one that gets litigated more often, way more often, is when they have the right to approve or reject, and they reject, and someone says, you used the wrong criteria, or you were out to get me because I'm rich, or I'm poor, or I'm African American, or I'm Latin, or I'm Asian American,
or I'm a fisherman,
or I'm Russian, or whatever the reason is.
I have weird taste
or
in
I
shirts.
have children, or
whatever,
or I have a pet,
and if that
or I have a
criteria,
pet.
and if that criteria is not clearly established in the documents, then they might have an
argument. And the truth of the matter is, there are laws, federal and state laws, to protect people based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and the like. But can someone afford to live there if that's in the condo documents that you're entitled to look at financial viability? Now the board is looking at someone's tax return and they're looking at someone's income. There is a level of discretion, analysis. How's it being applied? Is it being applied fairly?
Right.
Those are the things that, and I've seen it applied, and I've seen people complain about it, and I've seen people get rejected, and I've seen people push back, and I've seen condo associations push back on the pushback.
Right.
It's very interesting. And I will say this, call your lawyer.
Right.
Because you don't want to buy a lawsuit just because you made these decisions without the input of both management and the law firm.
And bearing in mind that obviously condo associations enjoy the ability, depending on how complicated it is, to amend their documents to include that on a go-forward basis.
You absolutely can. And I would recommend condo associations do that because you want to know who your neighbors are. Remember, this is a communal living arrangement, whether it's multifamily, tenants, or whether it's ownership in condominium. You want to know whether or not your neighbor was convicted of murder and has been let out after 15 years.
And I think there's a degree to which everybody anticipates some level of screening going into an organized community. I don't think anybody's surprised at the idea you have to fill out an application. So it seems like putting these one-offs aside where there may be, unusual circumstances, I got to imagine most people acquiesce and they go through the application process.
And as Luis said, you want to know whether people can afford to pay. If you're an owner and there's 100 units, and 10 decide not to pay or they can't afford to pay.
The burden of that falls on the other 90, right?
It falls on the other 90. So you want to make sure that your neighbors can pay.
It's partly why, from a management perspective, from my end of the world and management and development, to say it's not just you want it, you can't live without it.
And it's more critical now,
I was gonna say,
with the post-Surfside Champlain Towers laws, which we'll be talking about with...
Have we talked about that before ever?
Yeah, and we will be talking about it with State Representative when she comes on the...
With Representative Lopez. We're certainly going to raise it with the mayor of Miami-Dade. I know.
But I think what you're going to find is, as reserves can't be waived for structural items and the like, and with SARS studies, and with the new laws and special assessments to bring buildings up to code, you run into tremendous issues of financial viability of a condominium. And if you have people who are moving in that literally cannot afford to be there, now your other owners have not just the burden of their $50,000 special assessment, but their neighbors.
Right. I shared with Luis before we went on the air that you and I are welcoming the president of one of Miami's largest neighborhood associations on the show, and I'm very curious what his perspective is on these type of backgrounds. And
we have Ernesto coming on.
Yeah, what it's gonna do. What that perspective is, especially given where the state of affairs is here in Florida. Before we go to break, let me tie this back now to the larger prop tech issue. So we've sort of established what tenant evaluation does. How does tenant interact with other systems? I mean, obviously, most management companies are using, some type of enterprise resource platform or planning system.
You want to explain what that is?
Known as an ERP. Basically, they're using property management software, and that's what they sort of, put, your name, your information.
They track whether you made your payments or not.
It's accounting, it's service requests, it's work orders. It could be all sorts of different things depending on the company. How much interaction does tenant evaluation as a platform do with other platforms? How much integration is there or is there not?
Well, there is a lot of integration with other systems. Obviously, goes tied to the fact that once it's processed in tenant evaluation, that information needs to go to the property management company. And imagine a property manager that has 20 new residents typing in that into a system for property management. That's time, and it's a lot of time on that.
And cost.
But you're not pulling their information. You're giving them the information.
We push the information. So
right. That's all you do.
That's the only thing we do. We push information.
You're not taking their information
in. No, we don't.
For the record. Okay.
We push the information to the systems.
So that on top of not having to go through the manual process, the exposure and the paperwork, you're also essentially shortcutting now I've got a new resident or tenant, and now I can just give them that data, and it's actually from them. So we're also avoiding errors,
exactly,
misspelling of names, the wrong address or contact number, all that type of stuff. Yeah. So that's obviously a huge advantage. And as real estate technology, prop tech, as we're discussing today, is becoming more and more prolific in the industry, I have to imagine those types of integrations also have to be expanding because there's those core pieces of property management software, but now what I would call concierge type of software, whether it's the building links or the livelies, that type of software that is more managing day-to-day operations, service requests, amenity operations.
Yeah, my toilet is overflowing.
Those all generally tie together as well. And so that's, again, you're kind of the starting point. So again, it's not to overstate the importance of tenant evaluation, but you're sort of you're kind of the starting point of all of this data flow.
We are the onboarding of new applicants or tenants into a community.
So
owners and tenants.
Yeah.
And then they take that data, presuming they become an owner or a tenant, and they use that data in their programs in order to, whether it's service requests, payments, ledgers.
Well, I'm imagining, I'm thinking through the multi-tiered process. And for those of you out there who are part of, associations or buildings that have a lot of service components, I'm imagining this data flowing, the following way. So this data is coming in through tenant evaluation. I'm then populating the core property management software. That is often populating these sort of concierge grade platforms. Right. And that may be populating other third-party platforms. For instance, in my various work, I've done, food and beverage integrations. There might be an on-site restaurant or a third-party restaurant that is tied to, something like Toast or 7 Rooms. So tenant evaluation.
What are those things?
That's, for being able to order food or make reservations at a restaurant. And so what's interesting is imagining tenant evaluation data could actually wind up being, sitting inside of some restaurant, restaurant data. Obviously,
but even now, Josh, let me interact for a second. Tenant evaluation, like you say, we send data to the property managers companies. But additional to that, we have integrated with an incredible system that's also going to collect deposits automatically. So before you move to a condominium, you need to provide a check for the elevator. You need to provide a check for pet deposits and so on and so forth.
Security deposits.
So all that is tied up.
That's financial technology.
Yes.
So that's not really.
So we are the starting point.
Fintech, prop tech.
We're the starting point that's going to lead to that.
Well, because it also strikes me, and I know you and I have had this conversation professionally before, and David, you and I have as well, that at that point of inception, which is sort of the birthplace of a residence,
Right.
You're the gatekeeper, if you will. And so, what I remember especially in my early property manager days when I was a property manager many years ago, much better looking, much more hair, was really needing to get as much information financially upfront. I started in this industry, in the mid 2000s, and just a couple years before the real estate crash, and it became really clear in my early days that you had kind of one opportunity to get it right, because once somebody was approved and once they moved in the building and they were enjoying all the rights and benefits of residents,
hard to get them out.
Hard to, right? You can't kick.
You got to sue them,
right?
Get them out.
Sue them or foreclose or whatever the process.
I like the sue them part.
So this is with a little hashtag Haber law is you've got the opportunity to partner with these property management companies and these real estate assets to say, now is the chance for us to get their payment information, their deposit information, because right now they're beholden to this management company.
It's not just that. It's also so much more expensive later on to sue someone to get them out as compared to $150 to do a background check and a financial check and the like, and interpret the information, and the condo association or the homeowner. I mean, you do homeowners associations, I presume, as well. And there are tons of homeowners association communities in Florida.
And again, I got to imagine, in setting up some of this payment data or taking security deposits as part of the tenant evaluation process, so somebody moves in and they wreck the elevator on day one, and you didn't collect that security deposit, then you're chasing them. I mean, I've been to that movie before. I got
to tell a funny story. We had Haber Law had an office back in the
60s.
No, it had to be early. It had to be like 2002, and it was a downtown office building. And may he rest in peace, my best friend from childhood was renting an office from my law firm, my friend Ricky. And so Ricky gets a U-Haul truck, and Ricky goes up the ramp.
Sprinkler.
And doesn't realize the height of the truck is higher than the beam in the garage, and whacks right into a concrete beam and does about $30,000 worth of damage on day one. Trust me, the security deposit was not sufficient.
Was not sufficient to cover that, right? There's limits to it.
Yeah.
There's limits to it. Well, we're going to take a brief break. When we come back, Luis, we're going to talk about the prop tech industry broadly, because obviously tenant evaluation is touching so many of those spheres, and to understand from your perspective as a leader in that space, where we're going from here. So this is Sun, Sand, and Soul. Please join us as always on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Instagram, all your social media outlets that David is a prolific follower and expert in. We'll be right back.